Hi, Doug Andrew again. I hope you're enjoying this IUL Insiders series. In this particular episode, I want to empower you to be able to answer questions like, what are the actual historical rates of return on IUL? So I'm going to show you how I've achieved, and thousands of other people have achieved 6 to 10% average rates of return. But as I record this, we are on the verge of a new guideline where the insurance company illustrations to illustrate a product have to be extremely conservative because we are in a low interest rate environment right now. Now, interest rates are relative, which means when interest rates are high for borrowing, they're high for earning interest. When they're low for borrowing, they're low for earning. See, back in the 1980s, when universal life was first introduced, interest rates were high. Mortgages on houses were 18 to 21%. CDs at banks were paying 10. So on my universal life, because indexed universal life didn't start until 1997, I was earning on the general account portfolio rate of the insurance company between 11 3/4 to 15.5% for a decade, from 1980 to 1990. But then interest rates started coming down, and that's why indexed universal life was introduced, so you could still earn more like 7, 8, 9%. I'm going to share with you the actual historical rates of returns and the caps. But as I speak, we are on the verge of having to be forced to use what is called AG 49 illustrated rates. Now, this has actually been lobbied by the whole life industry. Did you know that? In other words, whole life has always had a hard time competing with the rates of return that you can achieve with indexed universal life. And so it drives them crazy when they can only show their actual dividend rates of 6 or 7% or whatever, or at best 8% historically, when we can show historically, we have indexed universal life policies that were credited 16% and 25%. Well, that drives them crazy. So they come out with restrictions. So under AG 49, they will then restrict the illustrated interest rate, and they want it to be super conservative so that it's sort of like comparing apples to apples in their mind. So it sounds like they're going to start out at 5.6. The most you can illustrate is 5.6. Now, they used to, dictate maybe 6 something or 7 something. It's interesting how rates fluctuate, and if people don't understand how interest rates are relative, they go, well, the agent showed me this. Well, it was actually based on history. Well, that's not the environment they bought it in. Well, okay. So having said that, I'm going to show you actual historical rates of return. And why I tell people the truth. I mean, this is what I have earned. Now we're in a low interest environment. Let me show you how this IUL will knock the socks off of most other places where you'd put money in banks at 1%. Oh yeah, if I earn 5 or 6% tax-free, it blows out of the water a CD earning 1 that's taxable, right? And so interest rates are relative. But having said that, I want to show people what I have actually earned, because I think interest rates are going to climb back up again because they're relative. Does that make sense? So as we go through, I want you to understand that most advisors that I've met, and I've met thousands of them, do not know how to calculate internal rate of return. Now, there are software programs, and they actually operate with high-speed trial and error. So let me explain that. If somebody would come to me and they would show me where they had been putting their money for the last 10, 20, or 30 years, they wanted to know what their average return was, or if I asked them, so what have you been averaging? They would say, I think between 8 and 9%. I go, I can look at it and go, no, you're not. Really? Well, that's what my advisor told me. Well, they were telling you the rate of return during the good periods, not the bad periods, and how a lot of the gains were offset by the losses. They were just showing you the rate of return in these little slices of time. I want to know the average internal rate of return. They go, well, what does that mean? IRR, internal rate of return, is if you have an insurance policy, you take all the aggregate premiums you paid into the policy, the gross amount you paid in premiums, in the schedule you did it, and then you're taking a snapshot in time down the road in the 20th year, the 30th year, whatever. And whether it's an annual statement and they've actually had that many years, or whether you're illustrating what could happen based on history, then you're taking a period of time, okay, 20 years in the 30th year. This is what we're projecting your cash value will be inside of the insurance policy. So you take that lump sum, let's say it's $1 million, and you plug in the payments of $1,000 a month for several years, and maybe you stopped and added some and took some out or whatever, but it's a complicated, process. So you take all of the deposits, withdrawals, and you put it in there, and you have this much money. Now you're saying, well, what was my average rate of return? You know how complicated that is to calculate when you have all these variable times you deposit money? So what happens is computer programs say, well, if you put in about this much and you have this much, it's probably between 1% and 10%. So they test. At 10, what would you have? At 1, would you have? And if it's inside of that, then they go, well, let's try 2 and 9. Let's do whatever. And so what it is it's high-speed calculations, trial and error, trial and error. Now it's done in nanoseconds. But then when you have a sophisticated program, it says, oh, you earned an average of 7.2349%. I mean, it's that accurate. And so most people are flabbergasted when they find out their actual rate of return is only 3 or 4% when they thought they were earning 7 or 8. This is true with insurance agents. I've mentioned in this series that from 2003 to 2007, I had over 3,000 CPAs, tax attorneys, and a ton of life insurance agents come through my 3-day training. They paid $6,000. Some of the nation's top whole life insurance agents came through the training because they heard me talk about what Universal Life does, and they couldn't even begin to make whole life do that. And so they would come in and they say, well, Doug, you keep talking about internal rate of return. What do you mean? I would go, you've never been taught that because maybe your leaders of your company didn't want you to know because it's not very good. Well, what do you mean? Our whole life policies have a history of 8%. I said, that's not the internal rate of return. Well, what is it? That's the gross rate of return. That's what the company is touting they're crediting. After all the costs of the insurance and everything like that, you're not netting. See, show me how much cash value you would have at age 65 if you paid the maximum amount into this whole life policy. And so they would show me this. And I say, so what rate of return is that? And they go, 8%. I said, that's not the net internal rate of return, cash on cash, as if the insurance were free. And they go, well, I don't know. So I would calculate it, and they would go, whoa, it's only 4.9. Yeah, you're telling clients they're getting 8. You're not telling them that 3.1 of the 8 is draining out in costs. Golly, I've never thought of this before. Yeah. So let's take it clear out to age 95. So we'd go out to age 95, and they would be shocked that they earned 8, and most whole life companies are not crediting 8, by the way, but if they did, they were only netting 5.9 by age 95. What? In other words, you're telling them 8, but they're only netting just under 6. Now do you get it? With maximum funded indexed universal life, I can earn 9, which I've earned 9.6% through some of the worst time periods since the Great Depression, and even 10.07. If I earn 9, I net 8. I'm netting cash on cash internal rates of return, which equal your gross crediting rate, not your net one. And that 3-point difference is huge, especially if you need money starting at age 65. I don't want to wait till I'm 95 and hope that I can still fog a mirror and start taking money, okay? And so this internal rate of return calculation is extremely important. So once you are understanding what I mean by cash on cash, you put money into the policy, you end up with this much money at this point in time retroactively. What would you have to be earning compounding tax-free after all costs are deducted in order to end up with that much money? That's called the IRR, Internal Rate of Return. Our software calculates that number. So when we go through and explain this, you've seen this in a previous episode where an indexed universal life insurance policy, if you have, let's say, $1 million of cash value, and the general account portfolio yield, which is averaged between 5 to 17%, well, that's been the range. This has been the average 8 to 9%. And that was the last 10 years when I created this about 8 years ago. But see, in that 10-year period, this was from 2000 to 2010, 2012. Most of the companies where I had my universal life, and I had it in about 6, their gross crediting rate was 6, but they need about 1 of those percentage points for them. So this is the 5% that they will credit my policy. Now, if I opt to link to an index, I can just take the $50,000 in cash, I can leave it there. But if I link to an index, I'm letting them have that $50,000 of interest to do whatever they want to do to be able to have the wherewithal to pay me whatever the index I choose or the indices I choose. So if you remember, if the S&P that year went from 1,000 and increased to 1,100, that's a 10% increase. They must pay me $100,000. And people say, how can they afford to do that? When I tell them my million has to stay safe in the insurance company earning 5, what am I giving up? What do I relinquish? The for sure 5. My money is safe in the insurance company, $1 million. If the economy, if the market drops 40%, my million doesn't go down to 600,000 because my money is not at risk in the market. I relinquish the interest. They took the 50,000, bought upside options in the S&P or the Dow Jones, whatever index I chose. And that gives them the wherewithal so that 50,000 of options doubles to 100,000 or triples to 150,000, but they cap. And so I taught you that in the worst decade since the Great Depression, if you have a 0% floor and a 15% cap, in that 10-year period, you would have had 5 years you didn't earn anything. 0. 0's your hero, though, because you didn't lose. The other 5 years, you made money up to a cap. Only 2 of those years did you hit the cap. And in that worst decade, you would have earned 7.23%. $1 million would have doubled to $2 million, where most people in America, their million was just barely back to break even again, not even quite that in the year 2010. That's just using indexing. So you're able to achieve that kind of an average rate of return. Rule of 72, your money doubles every 10 years. Then I showed you, you have other choices. You diversify. You have a 2% floor, a 13% cap, and you've averaged 8.11% for the last 20, 30 years if you choose that one. And then, here's another one, a 0% floor. You keep the cap at 13. That's the most they'll pay you. But they give you 140% of whatever the S&P does. So that's for volatile markets. If you're in 5, you're credited 7. You are able to cap out. And so people say, which one did you choose, Doug? All of them. See, if I diversify and I choose all of them, then I'm able to take advantage of rebalancing. Even if I went asleep for 10 years like Rip Van Winkle, by averaging all of these, I'm able to earn 9.62%. Now, if you calculate 9.62, by 2012, when most people in America finally, that had $1 million in the year 2000 and barely came back to $1 million in 2012, at 9.62 average rate of return, my million was worth $3 million. What would you rather have, $3 million or just barely your money back? Especially with inflation, $1 million wasn't worth $1 million. It didn't buy as many gallons of gas and loaves of bread as it did 12 years earlier. So that's the tax and inflation power curve that I've talked about. Now, when we look at this, I compare an insurance contract to a bucket. And we've taught you in this series that you need to comply with TEFRA, DEFRA, and TAMRA. If you want to put in $500,000 and you're 60 years old, what's the minimum death benefit? $1,250,000, okay? Now, that means I'm trying to maximize my rate of return. I want the spigot on the bucket, the cost of the insurance, to get smaller. I want it to drain out a smaller and smaller part of my money in the bucket. The GSP is the amount of money I can put in, and TAMRA dictates the fastest I can put it in if I want to have tax-free income is over 5 years, or actually technically 4 years and 1 day. And so I put the 500,000 in, 100 grand a year, 100,000 the first day of the first year, first day of the second year. By the fourth year, and then 1 day into the fifth year, I can put in the last 100 grand. Now I've complied with TAMRA. And when I access money the rest of my life, I'm grandfathered, it's tax free. So when you jump through these TEFRA, DEFRA, and TAMRA hoops, the cost of the insurance using option A will go down because the amount of money in the bucket. See, 500,000 is the most you could put in the first 11 years. And the compound interest, there's no limit to what the bucket can grow to. People say, you mean the most I can have is 500,000 in there? No, that's the most you can put into there. If you try to put in $1 more, the insurance company has to refund it back to you. You violated the definition of tax-free insurance. They won't let you do it. The $500,000 I've been teaching you doubles to $1 million. And then $1 million doubles to 2. 2 doubles to 4. 4 doubles to 8. People who started out with $500,000 have 8 million, some of them today, 30 years later. Well, reverse engineer that rule of 72. If it doubled 4 times, that means you were averaging 10%. 10 into 72 means your money doubles about every 7.2 years. That's pretty incredible. That's actual history. I can't illustrate that. I have to be super, super conservative and only illustrate 5.6. But at 5.6 tax-free, it blows these others out of the water, as you're going to see. If I can sort of under-promise at 5.6 and then over-deliver by actually achieving 7, 8, 9, or 10, wow. That's way better than most advisors who sort of over-promise and then under-deliver, right? So we talked about that. So let's just sort of summarize the difference between insurance contracts and how I explain it to a prospective client. So there's 3 basic types of tax-advantaged life insurance contracts: fixed, indexed, and variable. Now I'm talking about universal life. This is sort of true also with whole life. So historically, and I've been around the block for 46 years doing this, fixed may have a guaranteed minimum rate of 3%, indexed 0, but 0 is your hero. Variable, there is no guarantee. You can lose money. You could lose 30 or 40%. So I've never owned a variable contract, never will. Now, when we talk about the lowest on fixed that I've been credited has been about 4%. The lowest on indexed is 0. Some years I don't earn anything, but I don't lose. Variable, I have seen people lose 50%. $1 million of cash value went down to $500,000 in one single year, like 2008. Since the year 2000, in this window of time that I measured, I sort of plucked a 10-year period, and then some of these are like a 20-year average. Fixed has been 6.3, indexed was 8.47 in this period, and variable was 1.81. Ooh. Well, we talk about the highest on the variable was maybe 35. With fixed, it was 13.75 with this company. But over here in indexing, there was no cap, I was able to earn 39%. Now, when we look at all this, I want to know the 25-year average. So when we look at averages, we don't want to promise to the client that this will happen in the future. We show them the historical average, then we, again, under-promise, and then hopefully over-deliver. So here in the fixed, 7.52 on this one is the average. But when indexing came out, it went up to 10.07 by using indexing and rebalancing in this particular period. This was a 25-year period that I was talking about here. And then here, variable was only 9.14. And so which one would you choose? Well, to me, the choice is obvious. I'd rather have zero be a hero and not lose money and have pathetic rates of return when the economy is whipsawing and be able to average more like 10%. Now, can I promise my client 10? No, I don't even want to illustrate 10%. I want to show them the illustrated rate according to law. According to AG 49, it may be 5.6% in a given year. And if I can then compare it to the actual interest rates of other investments, those advisors will say, well, yeah, but in real times, in normal times, this is historically what we have earned on our mutual fund portfolio. I say, okay, if you want to compare apples to apples, then let me show you the actual historical rates of return. You with me? So then I go in here and I go, let's take a 30-year average. Here's different indexing choices, 0, 2, 0, 0, 0. In other words, that's what you will be guaranteed. Here's the cap, 13, 12, 11.2, 16, and no cap on that one. Now, this was at this point in time. I think this was around 2012. The participation rate, this one had 140%. This one with no cap, it was 65. You only got 65% of what the S&P did. But look, this is what I want my prospect to understand. Based on actual history in this 30-year period, you would have earned 8.11 using this one. You would have earned 7.73 in this one, 7.42 in this one, 8.85 average this one, 8.3. Do you notice something? It's pretty close. And if I can earn that kind of a rate of return compared to what? Other investments in the market that Dalbar says people only average 3.5 or 4, or whole life that only averages maybe 4 or 5, what would you rather have? So this is actual historical rates of return, and I can show the history if I'm comparing it to other investments historically. If I'm talking about current interest rates, that's why we use the AG 49 required illustrated rates based upon what is dictated by the NAIC, National Association of Insurance Commissioners. Those are the illustrated rates that the insurance company requires that you show. You can take those numbers and put it into software and plug in actual historical rates of return and say, now, based on actual history, if you had done this in 1980 or 1995 or 2000, this is what you would have today based on actual history with these caps and these crediting rates. It's actually pretty easy to illustrate if you have the right software. So when we talk about illustrating rates of return, our hands are a little bit tied. I feel like a straitjacket on us sometimes. It's like, well, I'm going to show you 5.6. Well, what have you been earning? 10, 8, way more than that. But isn't it sad you can't illustrate it because it makes your competition look bad? And the competition says that's no fair. We can't compete. So we're going to force you to illustrate less, a lot less than you've actually been earning. Now, it's silly, but that's what regulators do. I'm okay with that because I can still knock the socks off of theirs because of flexibility and everything else. But if I can make it zing at 5.6 and we achieve 6, 6.5, 7, 8, 9, 10, wow. Now it's just bonus. And this is the incredible way that you can relate to a client by under-promising and then over-delivering. The neatest thing that my sons do, Imran and Aaron, is they will often post on our Facebook platform, IUL Insiders and those who want to sort of see. He will post actual copies of the annual statements from our clients. Now, he doesn't show their names, but he will show a statement. This is one of them for my sons. I showed this in a previous episode. So over here, it shows that this person took their money and allocated 20% right here to the Barclays U.S. Dynamic Balance Index, another 20% to the S&P 500, another 20% to the NASDAQ 100, another 20% down here to the blended index, and the last 20% just in the fixed account with the insurance company earning 4.4. This was one actual annual statement. And look at this. 13.65 that year, 11% that year, 9.5 that year, 15 that year, 4.4 on 20% of his money in those 5 different places. That's called diversification. If you add all those numbers up, even with the 4.4 in there, it's over 10%. Now, I can't illustrate that for the future, but I can honestly look people in the eye and say, it earned 10%. 2017, people hit caps of 16. Many hit caps of 25. And so be careful as you illustrate, make sure you're in compliance, but also I think all progress begins by telling the truth. And so I tell my clients, in actuality, in the past, I have earned much higher than that. I cannot represent what the future holds. If you believe that the future can pretty much be predicted based upon some of the worst periods in the past, then I would use the worst decade since the Great Depression, 7.2%. I think you will realistically achieve more like 7.2, but does it make sense at 5.6? Yes. Well, then if we can move it up from 5.6, it's just gravy. It's icing on top of the cake. Does that sound good? Now, most people will go, that sounds wonderful. Thank you for shooting straight with me.